I crossed the highest land border in the world to visit the most controversial part of China. My journey started with a cancelled flight, 48 hours left on my visa, and no way out of Pakistan. I was stuck in the remote mountain region of Skardu, which is not a bad place to be stuck, but I had two choices. Either extend my visa and hope it comes through in time, or go on this epic adventure traveling to the end of Pakistan and into the most western point of China in Xinjiang province, which is an area known to be a pretty sensitive region. So I chose the more adventurous one. With barely any information online, I hopped on a bus and headed north to a tiny mountain village called Sost, the last stop before the Pakistan-China border. I didn't hear many positive things about this town, but I thought it was awesome. A single road surrounded by towering mountains with little shops, restaurants, and farms. I spoke to some of the nice locals, and they told me that they get wild ibex and yaks that roam around this area, and if you check at night, you sometimes get to see snow leopards. After asking around, I finally found a bus heading to the border. The route followed the famous Karakoram Highway, which is known as the world's most beautiful road and part of the historic Silk Road. But as amazing as the views were, crossing the border wasn't going to be easy. I'd been warned. There are multiple checkpoints where every photo, app, and document on your phone could be thoroughly checked for anything sensitive. And if anything gets flagged, even one photo, the entire bus would be turned away. So I spent the whole night double-checking on my phone while I had my last karahi. Early the next morning, we set off. I managed to get the front seat so I could get the best views. The first checkpoint at the edge of Sost was chaos. Our bags were searched, passports were stamped, and buses were rushing to beat the long queues. After an hour, we were back on the road. I sat back down in the front of the bus. This big bully tried to tell me that I stole his seat, so he convinced the bus driver to make me move, but I stood my ground and told him he could sit on my lap, and luckily he backed off. The second checkpoint took us into the Khunjerab National Park. As a tourist, I had to pay $20 as a fee to enter the national park, even if I was just trying to reach the border. But the views made it worth it. The park was stunning, there were snowy peaks, yaks everywhere, and wild ibex, which I missed because I fell asleep. After 2 hours, we finally reached the Khunjerab Pass, the border itself. At 4,700 meters above sea level, it's a popular destination even though the closest airport is a 7-hour drive away. I took a video of the border as we were crossing, and the driver told me to put down my camera. The Chinese police were staring at me with an intimidating look while whispering and pointing at my camera. After a few questions and a warning not to exit the bus until the next checkpoint, we were given way to the most remote parts of China, and it was beautiful. Now that we were in China, we had to switch to the other side of the road. We finally got to the main checkpoint. I started to get really nervous. Chinese security is next level. Obviously, I wasn't allowed to record anything here. Cameras were everywhere, and the Chinese immigration officers were checking everything. My bags were completely emptied, they were scanned, and they were wiped in every single little corner. And then came the scariest part, where they were checking our phones. The officers took our phones and they plugged them into laptops to scan photo albums and apps and all our documents to check for any religious or controversial material. And a sniffer dog walked around our bus and our bags and ourselves, and that was definitely the most intense part. Luckily, everybody was cleared. After the checkpoint, we then drove through these eerie villages where all the homes were spread out, there was barbed wire installed everywhere, and the security officers were stationed around the whole place. There was even a sign that said no honking. We weren't allowed to stop until we reached the next city, which was our final checkpoint, the city of Tashkurgan. After a few more hours of driving along the Tajikistan border, we reached Tashkurgan. We went through the strictest search yet. After a final round of questions, bag checks, and phone scans, I was finally through. The barbed wire disappeared, and the town felt safe and welcoming. I was supposed to stay one night in Tashkurgan, but I was so excited that I decided to keep pushing through, and I got a 4-hour taxi ride to one of the most mind-blowing cities I had ever seen in my entire life. And I'm so glad I made that decision, because that is how I got to meet Maggie. The journey had been long and exhausting, but I was glad I took the harder road. Crossing the border and getting to go along the Silk Road and on Karakoram Highway, the most beautiful road in the world, it was definitely a much better experience than just getting a visa extension. I started shaking with excitement when I arrived in China. I had an amazing time in Pakistan, and I'll 100% be back, but crossing the border reminded me of how many more amazing adventures I'm about to go on.